Well, hello everybody, this is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to your critique of the week. It's Friday, November 7th. Thanks so much for joining me. Let's see, we got a great crowd on hand. Thanks so much for being here. We've got, Lynn Schilling's here, Holly York, Phil Hall, Elle of Arcadium, Natalie Rook, good to see you. Shape of Soup is here, Dee Coleman, Shauna Bowling, Cindy Guntherman, Brian O'Sullivan is here, Christina Nueven, Kimberly Gibson-Tran, Mary Lisa, Dee Diminishus, Jamal Udin is here, Hemet Malika, great to see you, Hemet. Jamie Thomas is here, Bryn Pope, Cliff Miller's here, Katie Dozier all the way over in the other room. We've got Rose Lennard here across the pond, Dick Westheimer in Ohio, good to see you, Dick. Lynn Schilling, I already said, I think. Lisa Seidenberg's here, Tom Barlow, Emily Arnold Fernandez, Katie Scruggs Galloway, Chelsea McClellan, Shivpreet Singh, Mark Grenier, Ryan McCarty, Bryn Pope. All right, well, great cast of characters on hand, and so glad you could join me. And I put up, you'll see the bright light behind me. Right before I was about to hit start, I went and stuffed this window full of pillows so that it won't be blinding me in the face. So if anybody is here who has a submission in the queue right now, first one to mention it, we'll make sure we go over your poems. I think we'll start with the oldest poem in the queue first, though. As always, the critique of the week is that workshop experience that's so wonderful, live and in person, sitting around a table talking about poems. We do that every Friday right here. Leave as many comments as you can, trying to help the poets get better, make poetry sing. We want to learn each other's experiences, know our stories, be able to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. That's why we love poetry. We want to get better at it. Everybody collectively, we get to enjoy better poetry. We get to write better poetry ourselves. And by thinking about how that works, that's what makes us all better. And so I appreciate doing this. Let's see, who's saying? Oh, Tim Campbell. Let's do Tim Campbell. Last week, Tim was here too, and I mentioned it. So we'll definitely do Tim Campbell. Yeah, a bunch of people saying they do. Okay, and Phil Hall is there. Maybe I should write this down for next week or something. I kind of like being spontaneous, though. Well, we'll do Tim Campbell for sure. Let me type in Campbell. Now, as always, yep, there's Tim with 2 poems. We'll start with Tim. And we're doing this, I'm starting to be a little more discerning with the poems we go over. We have some 300 in the queue. And I'm going to start sending people to some general videos and give some general advice, and for maybe half of the submissions, and then and so we can dive in a little deeper. And one of the things I definitely want to do is get to the submissions of people who participate here. So it's good to see Tim Campbell. He's been here the last 2 weeks at least. No general questions from Tim. He's got 2 poems, pretty short poems too. So let's take a look. Yeah. All right. Let me get the screens a little bit arranged better. Okay, that's better. Okay, here we go. So there's the 2 poems by Tim Campbell. Right here. The first one is this. Things I must do for you to feel safe enough to love me. Things I must do for you to feel safe enough to love me. Don't diminish me. It's hard enough to be a wildflower without time to wait or waste on niwashi. I am capable of uplifting you as I am, but you must see this for yourself or go another way. All right, so that's the first poem of 2, a very short one by Tim Campbell. Tim Campbell being from, hang on a second. It doesn't show me on the regular screen where people are from. I got to click over here. Denmark, all the way across in Denmark. Good to see that. All right, so that was the first poem. And right off the bat, I mean, the main things that we're going to say for this one is, we need specificity and detail. We need images. We need to be able to connect with the poem in some way. It strikes me as a kind of private poem. It's the kind of thing that, would be good given to somebody because the somebody you give it to knows all the context of the relationship and what you're talking about, and that might effectively land. But for just us, sitting here reading it, knowing no idea who you are, it's really hard to connect without specific details. So having things, I think don't diminish me. It's hard enough to be a wildflower. Now that's the one sort of image or detail that we get, that metaphor. I'm comparing myself to a wildflower. We could dive into that and how are you like a wildflower, develop the poem from there, and then that could take us somewhere that really engages with us. But as it stands, then we go back to just talking directly to the you. I don't know what niwashi is, so I'm going to look that up. And I don't mind looking stuff up in poems. I like to learn. Niwashi. A blade that cuts soil as you pull it toward yourself? Is that what that is? A left-handed garden tool? Without time or waste on Niwashi? I'm not sure if that's what that is. So that's what Google's telling me. So without time, I guess that makes sense with a wildflower in context. So we're extending that metaphor a little bit by having that hand tool. I'm not sure how familiar people are. I'm not a gardener, so I don't know if that's a really common thing or not. But without time or wait to wait or waste on Niwashi. And so we have this little bit, and sort of it feels like this little bit could maybe be a haiku. It's like that amount of that amount of detail right there that could work. But then we go back to I'm capable of uplifting you, and we don't really have any connection to the you. The you means nothing because we know you're not talking to us directly or personally. There's one person who you are talking to directly, but we don't know who that person is. We can't step into their shoes and be that person. So it's really hard for us to feel any emotional weight to the you because we don't know who you is or don't have a sense of that. I'm capable of uplifting you as I am, but you must see this for yourself or go another way. And so again, we just need to hear the story. We need the details in order to connect. And that's really the bottom line. I assume everybody else is saying similar things on the in the chat. Yeah. So Saber Soup says, yeah, it's hard enough to be a wallflower. And that's the real takeaway. It's hard enough to be a wallflower is a good line. And why is that a good line? It's because it has that detail. It's not saying, it's not telling us how we're feeling. It's not saying we feel diminished or we feel like you're diminishing me. We're feeling it through the metaphor of the wildflower. In that one moment, we actually feel connected. Yeah. Yeah. So Kimberly Gibson Tran says, I wish the text of the poem gave us the things promised in the title. Yeah, exactly. So things I must do for you to feel safe enough to love me. Could we make a list of things of what that is and then be specific about it? Like actually show us that. Yeah. And with specific details. Okay. We're going to move on to the next poem, but thanks for sharing that, Tim. Let's take a look at the other one you sent. And this is The Arms of Your Own Kindness. Yeah, The Arms of Your Own Kindness. And we'll see if this has the same issues. The reason why we do two poems in this is because it's really helpful to see if it's just sort of a one-off thing where the poem has that issue or if it's a common thread, and you really have to work on all your poems having more detail. Yeah. Okay, well, here we go. So hollow is the promise of the past that remembering my favorite meal 1,000 times cannot save me from starving. An unstoppable arrow of time pressed so enormously between us was and will be is all the time left for whatever grace we might conjure. Yet 100 years cannot heal you on its own. The hound of time's been lashed there in the corner by a chain of tears, unable to run its course, bares its teeth and barks deafening. A thief holding you ransom, so I offer, no matter how true, here the past is a lie. Here is the sweetest kindness, delirious transformation, deep intimate timelessness, rare secret. Hear me clearly. Armor yourself. The future is too great a treasure to surrender to a memory. With all that can be, we are only here. Yeah. So again, it's the same issue that we don't have the details of the situation. We don't really get to hear the story. And so we don't have a way to really connect. There's a vague generality to what's being presented. And really, I think it's one of the mistakes that people make is thinking that if I'm more general, I'll connect with more people because everyone's had this experience, so everybody can relate. Everybody has a favorite meal, so I'll only say my favorite meal instead of what that meal is. But that's the opposite of how connections in art actually work. We connect more hearing about your favorite meal and how it looks and tastes and feels on your tongue than we do our own favorite meal, even if we don't like the food you're talking about. And so that's a perfect example right there. So hollow is the premise of the past that remembering my favorite meal 1,000 times cannot save me from starving. Describe what that meal is. Let us know what it is. And then we can really we can connect to it more. But it's going into the details that make a poem or any piece of writing connect. And it's having as much condensed detail as you can that makes a poem or any kind of writing connect the most. So specific details are really just the key. And that's going to unlock your poems in the future. Because there's emotional heart here. I think we can all feel that. It's just that we can't connect. We're like groping around in the darkness for what you're actually talking about because we don't have the details behind it. So details. You know, I say it all the time. It's like, real estate is location. Poetry is details. We need details. We need stuff. Okay. Yeah, and so people are saying, some good advice in the comments too. Just read through all that, Tim, and that's helpful too. But this is our general advice. So here we go. Let's take a look at another poem. Thanks for sharing those, Tim. And I have to do, let's see, this. I have to make sure I do it the right way now that I'm changing how I do things. But that's not, you don't have to concern yourself with that at home. Okay. Let's see, who else? Somebody else said Mimi. Let me see, who did I mention? I got to scroll way up. Phil Hall. That's what we'll do. We'll do Phil Hall too. And then we'll just go to the oldest ones after that. Phil Hall. Here's Phil Hall. 2 poems for critique from Phil. Phil hailing from Pensacola, Florida. No general questions, 2 poems. And we got one. It's not too long, but it's like a 2-pager, but with short lines. The other one's 1-pager with a little longer lines. So basically, two relatively short poems. Here, dust is 90% skin, and this is hang on one second. I have to fix this. Okay. Again, this is Phil Hall from Florida, and here we go. Dust is 90% skin, and let's see what we get here. I remember it a pit, tall red walls with water held in, but today it's trellised to the east with ivy swinging like loose promises, speckled with yellow and red sunflowers, brilliant against the deep ivy, against the fallen terrain, against the memory of shooting clay birds from that peak just to the west. He would cock back the heavy spring, trail the string, in his hands light as twigs, pull it slowly, in the voice only fathers have, and then release the bird wingless to be scattered like fog across the bare walls below. I remember it a pit, and I picked up the tiny box that held his name, his seed, his fallen hairs, those 10 slightly crooked toes, and the nose that found its way back to the mirror, only just this morning, and made my way to the peak just to the west, where we'd shoot clay birds. I sifted his fingers through the damp sprinkling of my palm, patted him down like a bulb, like a delicate shoot. I planted his feet like cedars at the base of the gorge, hoping for water, climbed to the summit and planted what was left, his footless legs, his shoulders too thin for support, his ideas legless as in the upturned soil between my fingers. And what wouldn't bury and what clung to me, I carried out of the gorge like a compass, hands in front upturned for the reading. And that was 10 years ago. This Easter, the cedars are tall and the ivy hangs in locks like his. The entire valley is full of butterflies, and from the bottom, in the midday wash of sunshine, they flutter like live confetti through the sweet breath of spring gardenias. All right. Yeah, well, that was the first poem of 2 by Phil Hall. And the first is Dust is 90% skin. And so there's some moments that I really like in this poem, which where the scene sort of starts to build and you start to feel connected. Hemant Malik says like a compass, hands upturned. Yeah, I like that one. Yeah, much more rich with detail, as Jamie Thomas says. Yeah, and a lovely conclusion too, says Tom Barlow. Yeah, Jamie Thomas is not sure exactly what's happening, but I like it enough I'd read it again. Yeah. And Rose Lar says, is this about sprinkling ashes? Yeah, that's how I read it. It was about sprinkling ashes. But there's some details that make it a little confusing to me. And so I think clearing that up, and I think it was slow to enter the poem, but once we did, it felt like the poem had some pace and energy. Yeah. Yeah, so Okay, well, let's read the poem and look at. We'll talk about what's working and what's not, because I feel like we could jump in at some point later in the poem is the start and cut maybe the first two stanzas was my original thought. But let's see. In the title too, dust is 90% skin. It's an interesting fact, and it's a good place to put an interesting fact that you wouldn't want to include in the voice of the poem. So that's an interesting observation. Is that actually true? I'm curious if that's actually true. But surprising if so. But anyway, here we go. I remember at a pit, tall red walls with the water held in. But today it's trellised to the east with ivy, swinging like loose promises, speckled with yellow and red sunflowers brilliant against the deep ivy. So here, ivy is repeated twice in a way that's really sort of jarring, and there's a problem, and I'm not sure it's ever really explained very well, but there is a problem with repeating words. You're sort of automatically forced, I think the main thing, you're automatically forced to notice the repetition. And so if the repetition isn't something that's adding to the detail of the poem, then the repetition ends up being distracting, because it's like hitting you over the head with the fact that, and then you just take it out of the poem for a second. And so it's really important, just as a general rule, to avoid repeating things unless you're repeating them with intention. And in art, there's a rule of three, generally, and it's because we can, with 3 points, we can get a sense of what shape we're looking at. You need to triangulate, and so there's a rule of 3 where 3 happens in art all the time, but 2 is not good. 2 we're uncomfortable with because the third point could be anywhere, and then we're very confused. And so having 2 ivies, just feels off. It's a kind of an uncanny valley in between. But if we had 3, it would work, and if we had none or just 1, it would be better. And I think just cutting the one of those ivies there, by the way. But the real problem with this section to me is that we don't really know. We get this description of it, but without knowing what it is. And so even as the lines are unfolding, it's hard to sort of resolve the image for me. So we feel a little bit lost and off kilter at the beginning, unnecessarily, I think. And so I think that's the reason why the opening felt a little weaker. And then it picks up after this section, though. And where it picks up, I'll keep going, but against the memory of shooting clay birds. So suddenly we're shooting clay birds, and maybe, the title could be Shooting Clay Birds. Clay being another thing on the dust and what we are in the end of ashes, And so maybe that could be the title, and we could start talking about the peak, and then we could know. And I think if the title was Shooting Clay Birds, and we just jumped right in, he would cock back the heavy spring, trail the string in his hands. A little typo there, don't worry about that. Typos happen. But in his hands, light as twigs, pull it slowly. And the P should be capitalized and pull it slowly because it's a full sentence, even though it's a fragment. The voice only fathers have, and then release the bird wingless to be scattered like fog across the bare walls below. So here we have the characters already in the scene and the drama of it and some really great lines. So just starting out with Shooting Clay Birds as the title, or maybe just Clay Birds as the title, and then diving in right here and cutting these first 2 stanzas, I think would make the poem a lot stronger. I remember at a pit, and I picked up the tiny, and you could even, if you do that, if you jump in here, you could take some of the detail. We know we're shooting clay birds somewhere, so we get sort of a sense of the idea of what the terrain might be like. And then I remember at a pit, and I picked up, you could add some of the detail that you left out. We cut from here back in here, and then that would flesh this out a little bit too, and you wouldn't lose your favorite darling up there at the top. So that's something to consider too. I remember at a pit, describe it a little bit more, and I picked up the tiny box that held his name, his seed, his fallen hairs, those 10 slightly crooked toes, and the nose that found its way back to the mirror. Only just this morning, and made my way to the peak. Yeah, so they're a little bit confused now. I assumed it was taking ashes to spread, and it back to the place where the clay birds were being shot. But then some of the details I find it a little confusing. So his fallen hairs, those 10 so I'm imagining that the tiny box holds all of him, all the ashes. But how only just this morning it held? Or the box held it, but now it's not in. No, the nose sorry, I'm rambling, but the nose that found its way back to the mirror only just this morning. How did the nose find its way back to the mirror? I mean, he didn't die this morning and cremated and you're out spreading his ashes already. So I'm not sure. That just throws me off a little bit. It made my way back to the peak just to the west, where we'd shoot clay birds. I sifted his fingers through the damp sprinkling of my palm. And, it's not really, it's all of him, not just his fingers, too. So this detail is a little bit confusing in that as well. Through the damp sprinkling of my palm, patted him down like a bulb, like a delicate shoot. And I start to wonder a little bit if I misread this, but I don't know. I planted his feet like cedars at the base of the gorge, hoping for water. And I think it's imagining like little bits of dust and of the ashes are being put in different places. I'm imagining these are his toes, these are his legs. I think that could be just explained a little bit more clearly, though. And just by, I sifted what I imagined were his fingers through the damp sprinkling of my palm, patted him down like a bulb and a delicate shoot. I planted his feet like cedars at the base of the gorge, hoping for water. I climbed to the summit and planted what was left, his footless legs, his shoulders too thin for support, his ideas legless in the upturned soil between my fingers. And see, this is where the detail is really taking off, and the poem is working really well. Great lines. We know the situation. We can feel the emotional weight of it. And there's a musicality to it. People already said really nice use of line in the poem. There's a real, just sense of the pacing of speech and making that musical. So that's really nice. And what wouldn't bury and what clung to me, I carried out of the gorge like a compass. I like that too. That's a great line, as I think it was Hammett said earlier. Hands in front, upturned for the reading. I'm not sure what for the reading is. That's another one where I didn't understand that line. But that was 10 years ago, so we're moving forward in time. This Easter, the cedars are tall and the ivy hangs like in locks like his. I think it's a great detail too, really nice. The entire valley is full of butterflies, and from the bottom, in the midday wash of sunshine, they flutter like live confetti. I like that. I'm surprised. It's one of those things where I've never seen myself that I can remember, the scattering of birds or butterflies being called a flutter of live confetti, but I think it's a great line. Through the sweet breath of spring gardenias. And so this is a poem with some really wonderful lines. I think that the last 2 or 3, 4 stanzas are just really great. It's a matter of getting into them quicker and making the poem more condensed by cutting the stuff that's just not working, clarifying a little bit. And then you have a really great poem, I think, because there's some really great metaphors, and great metaphors are hard to come by. Yeah. So let me... Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's what everybody's saying for that one. Let's move on to the next poem. Oh, Mary Lisa says he has his father's nose. Let me read that line again. I remember I picked up the tiny box that held his name, his seed, his fallen hairs, those 10 slightly crooked toes, and the nose that found its way back to the mirror only just this morning. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's what he means, what Mary Lisa says, that he has his father's nose, so he's sort of seeing his father's own nose. I think that has to be made more clear, and I think that's a bit of a leap to think that that's what it means. But it could be. It's an interesting idea. I think it needs to be explained a little bit. Yeah. All right, yeah, so everyone's sort of agreed. We're all in agreement of this pretty much. So just condense it down, get into it quicker, make it tighter, and then it's a great poem because there's great lines and great metaphors. Let's take a look at the other poem. And again, we are looking at 2 by Phil Hall, who is here at the moment. And this is a shorter one, or at least 1 page, a little longer line. Here we go. At 3 a.m., I'm going to get a sip of coffee. Maybe it was the 3 a.m. that wanted me to get some coffee. Anyway, at 3 a.m., it's unfair to ask. You always ask, must we mean what we say? You speak of bridges, of interdeterminacies, that's a mouthful, of a lack of universals, and in some mean sense I agree. But it's late October, the evenings are far too short for rory and discussions of meaning. What I mean now, with a cool wind coming over your shoulder and your hair forgetting its length, is that we should go down into the park and pass beneath the pines and the trestling jasmine to see what the stars smell like in this crisp October air, to see how the ants arrange rearrange the earth beneath us, to seek out the lake that moves slightly, leaving its rings around the sandy shore, the way a strong red leaves its legs, begging for sugar, begging for its body back the way we all do. If the ants haven't taken the hill to the north of the lake, if the wine is good in the earth, round enough to land us in the clearing, maybe we will find some point of perspective that will allow us to love the length of the moon falling from apogee. And if after the dew falls across our bared bodies, we should submit to saying nothing at all, submit to the rising and falling of chests on a cold ground, we will both understand, thick as grammar, what it is we mean to say to each other and the world and the ants as the owls fade to sparrows and the sun pulls the day over its horizon. So again, I think we're seeing, and this is Phil Hall, we're seeing some really nice acceleration into the flow state, that creative space where good things are coming out. You know, thick as grammar is nice, says Kimberly Gibson Tran. That's one of the lines that I thought of too. Begging for its body back as we all do. I love that, says Emily Arnold Fernandez. Ants rearrange the earth. Yeah, and so we have, and this is a typical sort of thing you see a lot, where there's sort of a long runway ramping up into the poem, and that was the same thing that happened in the last poem. So at the beginning, it's 3 a.m., it's unfair to ask, you always ask, must remain. We have no idea who the you is. I think actually, and if Katie's listening still, we should have a poetry space on use the you, the second person in a poem, and how important it is to establish who the you is in the subtle ways that that poets do. Like Li-Young Lee, if you look back at his episode on the Rattlecast, he's got a ton of poems, and let's look at, and my favorite, which he read differently on the Rattlecast. But this might be my favorite poem we've ever published in Rattle. And it's right here by Li-Young Lee, 7 Happy Endings. And this is completely addressed to a you. Later, and you were happy with a room, it gets to the you. But notice how we get to a sense right away before we even get to the you of who the you is. He starts, love, 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 where are we now? Where did we begin? I think one of us wanted to name this, wanted to call it something. Shadows on the garden wall, a man rowing alone out to sea, a song in search of a singer. I think that was me. I wanted to call it something. And you were happy with a room, 2 rooms and a door to divide them, and daylight on either side of the door, borrowed music from an upstairs room, and bells from down the street, bells to urge our salty hearts. But I wanted to call it something. I needed to know what we meant when we said we, when we said us, when we said this. So call it 7 happy endings. That would have been enough. You see, I woke up one night and realized I was falling. I turned on the lamp, and the lamp was falling, and the hand that turned on the lamp was falling, and the light was falling, and everything the light touched falling. And you were falling asleep beside me, and that was the first happy ending. And the last one, it went something like this. A child sat down, opened a book, and began to read. And what he read out loud came to pass, and what he kept to himself stayed on the other side of the mountains. But I promised 7 happy endings, I who know nothing about endings, I who am always at the beginning of everything, even as our being together always feels like beginning. Not just the beginning of our knowing each other, but the beginning of reality itself. See how you and I make this room so quiet with our presence. With every word we say, the room grows quieter. With every word we keep ourselves from speaking, even quieter. And now I don't know where we are, still needing to call it something, a clock the bees unearth, gathering the overspilled minutes. Yeah, and so the reason why this poem works, even though it's really intimately addressed to a you, is because we start out, love, 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 where are we now? Where did we begin? We know we're talking about to my love, whoever that is. And so as a reader, we know the you isn't me. We know the you isn't self-referentially the poet speaking to himself. We know who the you is. And then we can become attached to the you and to the I, the speaker, and understand this relationship. but poems, if you find a you poem, a poem that's in the second person that works, it always establishes who the you is right away. There's subtle ways you can do that so that we can connect with it. Because if we don't know who the you is, if the you is sort of Schrodinger's cat, it could be alive or dead, it could be 3 separate possibilities or even more, then we have no idea how to connect with the emotional resonance of the poem, and it just misses us. And so it's so important to establish that. And if we go back to the poem here, you always ask, what must we mean what we say? You speak of bridges, see how we don't know who this is? It's 3 a.m., we know that, but that's all we know. I mean, it could be a father, a friend, it could be talking to Wittgenstein, and we have no idea, and so we can't connect. And that's the issue with the you poems. Anyway, and so really, is the poem threads through and begins like this is just, I have no connection. It just flies past me sort of in emptiness. But then the poem picks up. But it's late October. The evenings are far too short for Rorty and discussions of meaning. So Rorty is the first that we get a clue that there's some person there and discussions of meaning. But the poem picks up a little bit after that. What I mean now, with a cool wind coming over your shoulder and your hair forgetting its length. See, that's a great line. If we started the poem here and the title was some hint at who you were talking to, then it would be a great poem, I think. Yeah. And so that's what you got to do. You got to cut that, start here, but then notice how this is what I was talking about before, though. For a lot of poets, this is how it works. There's sort of like a runway, and you need to take off into the soaring of the poem. It feels, to me, I say too, it feels like flying a kite. You're running headlong into the wind, and you're just dragging this thing behind, hoping it catches something, but then it catches something, and it starts to soar. And the first, third of both of these poems are just that running across the field before it's flying. And then you can feel, and then that's where the images come, all the spontaneity, all the detail, all the interesting lines, all the music just starts when the poem takes off, but there's nothing before that. And so, yeah. And so here's the spot where it starts to take off. And so start the poem there and then figure out what we need to know what's going on at that point, and then put that in the title, and then you've got a good poem. It's a sort of a quick fix. What I mean now, with a cool wind coming over your shoulder and your hair forgetting its length, that's a great line, is that we should go down into the park and pass beneath the pines and the trellising jasmine to see what the stars smell like in this crisp October air. Feel how much detail is like rolling out. And that's because it's engaging really in the right hemisphere of the brain and the master instead of the emissary. And it's just flowing out. That's the flow state. That's what we want to get to, where the symbolic understanding, the images standing for deeper feelings, it's just coming out. And you want to let that out, and that's the magic of poetry. And so we kick into that gear eventually. But to see what the stars smell like, saying what do the stars smell like is not something that you, if you're plotting out the poem, would think to say. But if you're running through with that spontaneous creativity, you hit that. You say what the stars smell like in this crisp October air, to see how the ants are rearrange the earth beneath us. Not just the ants rearranging the earth, but they're, I said that wrong, but the rearranging the earth is a different way to think of the ants, not to the ants themselves, but how they're changing the earth. There's a really novel way to see that. To seek out the lake that moves slightly, leaving its rings around the sand shore, the way a strong red leaves its legs begging for sugar, begging for its body back, the way we all do. I'm not sure what a strong red is. That's one line that doesn't catch for me. If the ants haven't taken the hill to the north of the lake, if the wine is good and the earth round enough to land us in the clearing, maybe we will fill some point of perspective that will allow us to love the length of the moon falling from apogee. Another great line. And if after the dew falls across our bared bodies, we should submit to saying nothing at all, submit. And then this is just a great riff at the end too. I think we end up, I don't know why it's being condensed. It got a little hard to read just because there were no line breaks anymore. Just break it like you were the rest of the poem so it stays easy to read. Submit to the rising and falling of chests on a cold ground. We will both understand, thick as grammar, that's a great line, what it is we mean to say to each other and the world and the ants as the owls fade to sparrows and the sun pulls the day over its horizon. A great image to end on, and really nice poem there. I mean, that's the spontaneous energy we're all looking for. Jamie Thomas says, "Oh, I know exactly what they meant by strong red." Okay. Yeah. Oh, strong red wine. Okay. The strong red leaves its legs. Okay. Okay, I'm trying to look at this conversation. Maybe I'm... Let's see. Oh, we were going to have an episode. Speaking of, Brian Sullivan says, I agree with Tim's point about the U poems, though I think there might be some counterexamples, like Prufrock, where the ambiguity of the U becomes something interesting to think about. I don't know. I don't remember. I'd love to hear. I'm sure there are examples where that's played with. I don't think of Prufrock that way, so I'm interested until next time I look at that poem to see what Brian's talking about. And we wanted to have a Prufrock episode of the Poetry Space too, so maybe we'll literally just do that. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, so I think that's just the sum of it. I think, and being able to get into that flow, that rhythm, where spontaneous musical speech is coming out in symbolic language, and that's the thing that not many people can do actually. And so that you can do that is great. It's just a matter of harnessing that by noticing where it takes off, where you're sort of running with that internal energy, where the poem is writing itself, and finding your way into that, and then shaping that, what comes of it, into a way that we can understand with enough context. Okay. But really great, so much meat to work with in these two poems. It's one of the rare cases where you could just sort of chisel it down to something really strong. So thanks for sharing this. Again, that was Phil Hall from Florida. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. Let me take a look at, let's just go back to the oldest poems in the queue. And by removing Phil Hall from the search window, and we'll flip back to, so we're back to March 19th. It's probably the last one we do today. Okay. No general questions. This is Joseph Milish from California. Oh, and there's a cover letter here, so let's see. So Joseph says, please consider these poems for a critique. Over the last 40 years, I worked as a trail locator, so we got some backstory. 4 books of prose and poetry, okay. And the reason why, by the way, there's so many March submissions, is this where I replied to a bunch of submissions and said, hey, if you want feedback, do the critique of the week, because we pretty much caught up at that point. And then we got a flood of people setting in. I assume these are probably submitted as general poems by Joseph, but I'm not sure. But let's take a look at them right here. So this is In the Days of My Illness. Just to say as I'm following this little discussion, which is why I keep hesitating. Brian O'Sullivan says, let us go then, you and I. You seems to be Prufrock's wingman, but may also be the reader, and according to the epigraph from Dante, a fellow resident of hell. Well, I think, to me, it's sort of, it's like all at the same time, those things, because we, the reader, are following him along, and so... And I think we go through the same hell that he does. And so it's kind of the beauty of the poem is that it's all the 3 of those things at the same time. But it's not like it could be this person or this person or this person. And our interpretation of the poem changes based on who we think that is. It's like it works because we, the reader, are all 3 of those things simultaneously. Which is not the same thing as being like your father and your wife at the same time. Hopefully. Okay. Anyway, here we go with The Days of My Illness. And again, sorry, Joseph Milosh. On this cruise ship, it is easy to embrace the mournful pity forged by fever and aches. I hold my bookmark, a postcard of an apartment in the 19th century Norwegian village. Each wall has 3 metal bars that appear to be a ladder leading nowhere. Now my eyes act as if they don't want to cement this picture into my memory of the illness cruising through me. Already it's too late because each day seems as dark as the picture of the iron rungs securing the outer wall to the inner wall in this picture. Those black bars fasten my dreams to memories. I am dreaming a memory of my mother sliding her hand over my forehead during the fall when I suffered from the mumps. No, reality disappears like steam under COVID's hot hand. Closing Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year, I believe my mother, her face wrinkled with concern, leans over me. How I wish for the tenderness of her fingertips. Then, in the window, the sun appears, and I believe I hear it sinking into the North Sea. Everything is imaginary, even my mother offering me a cup of chicken soup. Yeah, so Abigail Cargo says tidy structure and line break. Yeah, there's a nice rhythm, a nice cleanliness. It's well plated, as we like to say. And there's a good sense of rhythm and pacing through the lines. The thing that strikes me, and if this was a submission, is there's just so many COVID poems. It's similar to the 9/11 poems when I first started working as an editor. You'd get all these 9/11 poems over and over again, and sort of saying the same thing, where even out of the corner of your eye, and I don't know if this is how it feels to readers, and I'm curious to see what you all think, but if you see, like I do, just looking, by the time I'm looking at the title, out of the corner of my eye, I already see that all caps COVID. And I'm already thinking, another COVID poem. Do you feel that way? Yeah, Jamie Thomas says it feels both too late and too soon to bring COVID into anything. I'd find something less specific. Exactly. It really detracts from the poem because there's just been so many, and all like the plague years, and I've mentioned this before, but that year of COVID, we had a record, I think, at the time of Chapbook Prize submissions, and like a third of them were called like Diary of the Plague Year, and we all lived it. Yeah. And so it's one of those things. Yeah. Okay. So everyone agrees. But then every time, for the 9/11 poems, I'd be like, oh, we're never going to publish another 9/11 poem. And then every once in a while you'd get one and like, oh, that's a different angle. That's something interesting, but it really has to be something interesting and something different in order to make it work. Yeah. As Katie says, the more that has been said about something, the harder it is to say something new. Exactly. And Rachel Greaves says too, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I feel the same way about mass shooting poems. And it is the same way. It used to be easier to publish mass shooting poems in Poets Respond. And now it's kind of like, as Cindy said, COVID is still here. We can't escape it though. Yeah, I mean, we probably have it right now. Let's see. Dry Montito says it's the most under-discussed in poetry. I think there are certain angles that are completely under-discussed, but not the ones that we see most often. Anyway, in the days of my illness. So on this cruise ship, it is easy to embrace the mournful pity forged by fever and aches. I hold my bookmark, a postcard of an apartment in a 19th century Norwegian village. So in the days of my illness, I'm curious what the illness is. And we're on a cruise ship, or is life the cruise ship? I'm not sure how to take that. But each wall has 3 metal bars that appear to be a ladder leading nowhere. I'm not sure if we're in a figurative space or a literal. Are we actually on a cruise ship here? Maybe it doesn't matter, but it's lacking some clarity because of that. Now my eyes act as if they don't want to cement this picture into my memory of the illness cruising through me. And then the illness is cruising through on a cruise ship. It's a little too cheeky, I think, to repeat that. It's too poety to kind of do. It takes you out of the poem, which we want the poem to be, a singular experience of the music of some speech. And having the poet be noticed very often, unless it's something that we're doing very intentionally and frequently, it just doesn't work. Already it's too late because each day seems as dark as the picture of iron rungs, securing the outer walls to the inner walls in this picture. And again, here another time where the picture is repeated, so it's another place where it throws you out of the poem. Those black bars fasten my dreams to memories. And here we get a really abstract line because I'm not sure if we're actually on a cruise ship and what the iron rungs are. It's like there's some really interesting details, but I'm having trouble like putting the actual puzzle together. So I feel a little disconnected from the poem even 3 stanzas in. Even though there's nice lines and a good sense of what's going on in the poem, I still don't really connect. Yeah. As Mark Grinder says, works the latter metaphor too hard. Yeah. Am I dreaming a memory of my mother sliding her hand over my forehead during the fall when I suffered from the mumps? No, reality disappears like steam under COVID's hot hand. Closing Defoe's Journal of the Plague Year, I believe my mother, her face wrinkled with concern, leans over me. So is he in bed with COVID? Is he on a cruise ship? I just wish I could connect a little bit more. With concern, leans over me. How I wish for the tenderness of her fingertips. I like that, where it gets to that. Then in the window, the sun appears, and I believe I hear it sinking into the North Sea. Everything is imaginary, even my mother offering me a cup of chicken soup. And so that's a nice detail to end on. Jamie Thomas says, I'm not sure what to take away from this other than a fever dream sequence. Yeah, exactly. And we're not quite sure where it's happening, so it's hard to feel connected and have an emotional connection to it. Christina Nueven says, I kind of like the way we can't tell reality from fever dream toward the end, but I think it should be more impactful if we were more grounded in the story to begin with. Well said. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Mark Grinder says it's all imaginary. Yeah, it's just, yeah. Jamie Thomas has some nice lines here and there, though. It just doesn't connect to a coherent whole. And it's a subject where you have to do something really interesting and go to a deeper level to make it work. And Shape of Soup says might work better within a collection. That's a great point. That happens very often because then we know the situation, we know the backstory. They can add a little bit to the telling of an overarching narrative arc within a collection. Maybe it works that way. But as a single standalone poem, it's not clear enough what happens for us to really connect at an emotional level. We get that it's a fever dream. Some of the details are nice, but there's not a lot to take away from it. And the writing is nice too. Yeah. Winston Munn says the last 2 lines should begin the poem, so it isn't a gotcha at the end. That's a great suggestion. What if we did? What if we started in the days of my illness? And then we started, everything is imaginary. Even my mother offered me a cup of chicken soup. And then launch the poem from there. I think that would work. Let's see. So I want to look back at the... I'm just generally curious about the discussion. Because I think there were some dissenters saying that we should write more COVID poems. So I'm curious to know what readers think. Let's see. Chelsea McClellan says she doesn't feel that way, but also wasn't reading contemporary poetry in 2020. Yeah. Okay, well, I think most people are tired of it, is the general gist. Marianne Carr says, comfortably numb, except you're on a cruise ship. That's great. Okay. Let's take a look. I think there's another poem, right? Yeah. La Jolla Tide Pools. Oh, I've been to the La Jolla Tide Pools with the kids. Joseph Milosh from Poway, California. La Jolla Tide Pools. This morning, Patsy, we are in our 50s, braiding our fingers, we stroll slowly and watch our barefoot shadows cross the sand beside the cliffs. The ocean sparkles as far as we can see, and we seem as young as we were once in the evening when we strolled under streetlights. Remember yourself young, shy, and idly loitering with me on Main Street. You are still shy as you walk next to me on this beach and over the rough stones, holding the secret caves of tide pools. Stopping, we watch the hermit crab, that cult leader strutting his wealth in the bottom of the pool. You are here. I am beside you. We control nothing but tell the ocean's mood by its waves. They blindly rise, falling and leaving tatters of foam that erase our footprints. As the surf abandons the kelp's wing-shaped leaves to the sand fleas, the sandpiper tenses before sprinting behind the receding waves. This morning, we are old and walking hand in hand along the water's edge on the Pacific. Okay, so again, with this one, some great lines, great plating of the poem. I like a lot of the details. We get into the scene. The question, similar to the last one, and maybe it sort of makes the issues with the last one resolve a little more clearly, but the why of the poem doesn't feel like it's there. And this is like maybe a great segue to talk about our wonderful episode of the Poetry Space that just released today with Jane Hirschfield. So the Poetry Space, if you're new, is Katie Dozier, my wife and Rattle's associate editor. That's our independent podcast that we do outside of Rattle, just for fun, because we love poetry. It's fun talking about poetry. We sit around talking about a topic every Friday afternoon. We got some of the folks here. Brian O'Sullivan's one of them. Dick Westheimer sits around and joins us too. We have guests. Jane Hirschfield was the guest this week, talking about her essays, that type of poem that she does. And an essay is what breaks apart, in chemical analysis and material science, breaking something apart into its constituent parts is to assay it. So there's like assaying offices for the gold miners, and so interesting talk there about what poems do and what's different for her with an essay versus her typical poems that she writes. And one of the things she said, we talked about a poem having some kind of question at its heart, having some kind of thing you're trying to work out. A poem is a tool. It's a mantra. Mantra is mind tool in the Sanskrit. And that's what poems actually are. They're tools for understanding and to getting to a new space. They're transformative. That's why you cast a magic spell, something changes. Something happens in a poem. And so in order for a poem to really be a functioning poem that we care about, something has to happen. There has to be some kind of mystery at its heart that we're working, even if we fail, that we're working to resolve and understand better. And I think both of these poems don't have a central question at their heart. They're describing scenes, but there's no compelling reason why the poem has to be written. And if you look at poems that are successful, you can always get to like, what is the poem? Like, look back at we'll just jump right back to Seven Happy Endings. It leads off with what it's trying. Love, 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 where are we now? Where did we begin? And then he's trying to figure out, where are we now and where did we begin? And how did we get from there to here? And that's the journey, that's the struggle, that's the mystery, that's the question that sparks the poem and pushes it forward. And by the end, he has a way of articulating that, which is a strange, elliptical, symbolic way, still needing to call it something, a clock the bees on earth gathering the overspilled minutes. And what the hell does that mean? I don't even know, but somewhere deep inside my subconscious or my right brain, I feel like there's a truth to that, and that's what we're seeking in poems. And even, if you're, no matter what kind of poem you're writing, there has to be something emerging from the process of the writing, pushing us forward into our understanding of our own experience of reality. And I think the problem with these poems is they explore in detail some situation in its nice detail. But you get to the end and say, so what? Because we didn't learn anything. We didn't go anywhere from that. And so, people are asking about how to watch the Poetry Space. Yeah, it's audio only. Find it on Spotify or iTunes are the best two places to listen there. It's other places too. I don't know, TuneIn or Amazon Music, whatever. Just type in the Poetry Space, you'll find it. And it's great fun every week. And part one with Jane Hirschfield, and you'll learn all about assays. Or yes, assays. One is the, in America we say assay, and in the UK they say assay. So mostly around the world they say assay. I did a lot of mRNA assays back in the chemistry lab. I don't know why we called them assays instead of assays. Maybe, I don't think nobody was British. Anyway. Yeah, so I think that is gonna, let's see. Is that it? Do we have anything more to say about this poem? Dawn or Palm Olive? Good question. Let's see. Brian O'Sullivan, Brian O'Sullivan says, it seems like the why here might have to do with aging and realizing we don't have control. I agree, it's unclear, though. Is there some... Yeah, and then it's yeah. Where was it? Kimberly Gibson Tran says, I could see that theme. We just need a theme line to make it work. Yeah, something to get us to that space would be helpful. And I just don't see here. Should we read this poem one more time before we go? Let's think about the meaning and how we can make the meaning, if there is one, come out and be more apparent. Let's just focus on why is this poem being written. We'll read it one more time. It's not too long. La Jolla Tide Pools. This morning, Patsy, we are in our 50s. So great start, because it's an address, but we know Patsy, we know we're in our 50s. We pretty much know the relationship and the situation. That's great. Braiding our fingers, we stroll slowly and watch our barefoot shadows across the sand beside the cliffs. So nice detail. The ocean sparkles as far as we can see, and we seem as young as we were once in the evening when we strolled under streetlights. So that one, Kimberly Gibson Tran says, just add, we have wasted our lives. The last line. Yeah, exactly. But that's where Brian O'Sullivan's picking up on the aging being the issue. Remember yourself young, shy, and idly loitering with me on Main Street. And again, we do that same street. We another repetition of street in a way that that clunks instead of adds. You are still shy as you walk next to me on this beach and over the rough stones holding the secret caves of tide pools. I got a really nice rhythm to that, really nice detail. There's a texture to the language. Stopping, we watch the hermit crab, that cult leader strutting his wealth in the bottom of the pool. You are here, I am beside you. We control nothing but tell the ocean's mood by its waves. They blindly rise, falling and leaving tatters of foam and erase our footprints. So this to this point, I guess, maybe, the aging and, we used to be here, we were younger under the streetlights, now we're here and we can't control that. That's like going in that direction of having a conclusion that feels worthy of reading the poem, right? As the surf abandons the kelp, wing-shaped leaves to the sand flees, the sandpiper tenses before sprinting behind the receding waves. This morning we are old and walking hand in hand along the water's edge on the Pacific. So instead of like pushing deeper into this concept and like exploring it more, we control nothing but tell the ocean's mood by its waves. We just go turn back and sort of rehash some of the scene and just leave it sitting there. They blindly ride, blah, blah. And none of this stuff, we don't really care about this stuff. We care about this stuff. I'm trying to think of a good... Yeah. You could have look for a but, but tell the ocean's, we control nothing but tell the ocean's mood by its waves. I'm trying to think of a way to go. I could feel like we control nothing but tell the ocean's mood by its waves. We control nothing but, and then get deeper into that concept. And maybe that's the way to go toward an ending that has more meaning coming out. I mean, this one like sort of skims off the surface of a deeper meaning and then flies back to where it once was, like a boomerang poem, I guess. Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, that is going to wrap up the critique of the week for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. It's been a lot of fun, as it always is, because you guys are so great. I really love hanging out, hearing your thoughts on poems. I learn a lot. Hopefully, the poets learn a lot. We all learn a lot in the process. As I mentioned, do check out the Poetry Space. That's The Poetry Space. Just type that into iTunes or whatever for the Jane Hirschfield episode. Jane was a guest on the Rattlecast for episode 211 a couple years ago with her new, at the time, book, The Asking. It's a wonderful episode. I re-listened to it, kind of preparing a little bit for yesterday's Poetry Space. Definitely worth going back and look at. It's one of the most liked episodes of the whole Rattlecast series, so check that out if you haven't seen that one. She's a wonderful poet, sort of after my heart in a lot of ways. Both as a Buddhist, both interested in science. A lot of things I love about Jane Hirschfield and her work. So check out that episode and check out the Poetry Space, talking about her essay form, and learn how to do that yourself. Now, this week's guest on the Rattlecast coming up is going to be... Oops, that was this week's. This week we had J.R. Solange. Next week we have Kai Carlson Wee. Now, Kai's book, Rail, won the A. Powlin Jr. Award. I think I'm missing a name in there. But the A. Powlin Jr. Award, let's call it, from BOA. That first book award that I always wished I'd won, being from Rochester, but I did not. His book was Rail in 2018, about riding the rails. A really interesting life. Both Kai and his brother Anders had, literally hoboing it from place to place on trains, just hopping on trains, dumpster diving. Really fascinating sort of life they were living back then. They both wrote books about it. Kai's is Rail. There's also a documentary about it if you want to check that out leading into the show. It's like 15 minutes long. I'm not sure what it's called, but check it out at his website. But really interesting guy, interesting poet. He teaches poetry at Stanford now. He's got a new book coming out too next year. But now we're going to talk about some of those poems and Rail with Kai Carlson Wee. The prompt for this week was to... Hang on. I should always put this up as I'm talking, but I don't. Write a poem about a time you found yourself somewhere you didn't belong, but have the poem turn to somewhere that you do. So write a poem about a time you found yourself somewhere you didn't belong, but have the poem turn to somewhere that you do. That's your prompt for this week. Your guest, Kai Carlson Wee. That was Katie Dozier's prompt, of course. She'll be there with her poem. We'll all be having fun sharing poems. That's next Rattlecast number 317 with Kai Carlson Wee, Monday, November 10th, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. Hope to see you there. Hope you have a great weekend. In the meantime, we'll talk to you later. Goodbye.